of the study session for July 19th, 2021, and the council will need to decide on a presiding officer. So if you'd like to do that now.
By motion?
By motion.
I would move that we assign or request that Councilmember Loquist serve as the presiding officer for this meeting.
Second.
There you go.
You're outnumbered.
Okay, you want to take a voice?
Do we need a vote?
Oh, yes. Miller,
Aye.
Lilquist,
Aye.
Lamb,
Aye.
Engel.
Aye. Okay, I guess
There
then
you
I
go.
take it.
Take it away.
And it's approved.
So this is our Housing Action Plan Council study session. And so I'm going to turn it over to Kirsten, it looks like.
Okay. Good evening. I was going to say mayor and council, but good evening, council members that are here. Yeah, this is a pretty robust topic. I'm going to try to narrow it down to just the key points. And then, of course, at the end, you can ask lots of questions. But I do have a PowerPoint that I had already, you guys received on Friday, I believe, and I'll be sharing that. Okay. All right, so we have been working on the development of a housing action plan, and I'm going to go into a little bit of detail about what that is. So this just kind of gives you a really quick outline of what I'm going to cover during the presentation tonight. So we're going to talk about what a housing action plan actually is, the steps we take to develop the housing action plan. We also conducted a housing needs assessment to inform the plan. So I'll give you some key findings from that. That we also need to review our local policy framework. So that means a review of the comprehensive plan policies and goals, as well as the land development code. I'm going to share with you the goals that we established for the housing action plan, strategies for consideration, a little bit about the community engagement process, and then talk about implementation, what comes after that. So we'll just dive right in. So a housing action plan is something that the State Department of Commerce is promoting that communities across the state conduct because of the housing crisis in the state of Washington. And so a housing action plan is a plan including strategies and implementing actions for promoting greater housing diversity, affordability, and access to opportunity for residents of all income levels. And so if you look at this little graph or chart over here, it's talking about the housing action plan informing your comprehensive plan and guiding the implementation strategies, which could be your development regulations, infrastructure spending priorities, permitting processes, fee structures, and housing programs. So the strategy should encourage housing development that meets our housing needs that are specific to Ellensburg. And when we talk about strategies, it's really going to be at a high level, and additional work will come afterwards throughout the remainder of the process and afterwards as we prioritize. So this basically is just a step-by-step process for how we develop this. I'd mentioned previously that we do conduct a housing needs assessment, and then we do the review of the local policy work. We review the strategies and displacement, develop an implementation and monitoring program. You adopt the housing action plan, and then you actually implement and monitor. And then throughout it, you have a public engagement piece. So I'm first going to talk to you a little bit about what we learned with the housing needs assessment. So at a previous work session, we did review the 7 key findings from that. We'll touch on a couple of them again, but I'm going to provide some other statistics that council can take into consideration as you start to think about the why. Like, so why are we pursuing the housing action plan, and how the data can be used to help make decisions. There's a lot of decisions to be made and choices coming up. So with this first slide, it's pretty basic demographics. It just shows you the population growth in Ellensburg. From 2015 to the projected 2037 population. So we do need to plan for 32,540 residents in the Ellensburg city limits and the UGA by the year 2037. And that was established in our comprehensive plan that we adopted in 2017. One thing I did want to point out is that the housing action plan is intended to help us plan for this growth that is happening. We're not inviting the growth, it's just happening. And so we need to be prepared in advance and be proactive on that. And then I did want to share just a couple of key points. So in 2020, the OFM estimated the population in Ellensburg and the UGA at 22,879. The city alone was 20,640. And because this was going to come up, I just wanted to share this. Our population estimates for 2021 dropped down to 19,510. And that's purely due to the drop in the number of students that were residing on campus during COVID. And OFM assured me that those numbers would go back up as soon as school resumed back to normal. Another statistic that we found was that in Ellensburg, where it's majority white and non-Hispanic, but it is growing more ethnically and racially diverse. From 2010 to 2018, Ellensburg's Hispanic population increased from 7% to 12%. And then on to the next slide, I'm going to jump down to this fact first. Just points out that CWU is more racially diverse, and with 77% of the Ellensburg population is white on the campus, 53% is white. So you have more of a racial diversity when you go onto campus. We also looked at the student population numbers for who was living on campus. And so in 2019, you had 9,331 on-campus students in Ellensburg. And of that amount, 40% lived in on-campus housing, and the remaining 60% either lived in Ellensburg or one of the surrounding communities, because they do have commuters that come here. So it's another interesting stat to keep in mind. On this next slide, I wanted to talk about, oops, sorry about that. Let me get back into place. Okay. This is Ellensburg households by type. And we kept this in here, wanted to point out that we have 30% of the population that is single adults and 27% that is adult roommates. And we have less than 20% of the population that has children. So couples with children is at 13% and single parents is at 5%. And household size has been shifting away from two-person households toward both one-person households and four or more person households. And one of the stats that the demographers came up with is that it's likely that Ellensburg student population who do not live in dorms fall into either the single adult category or the adult roommate category. We can't exactly parse them out, but that's a pretty useful information that we go by. On this slide, we're going to talk about the household units that are available. So if you can see on here, this represents the single family homes and this represents multifamily of 5+ units. And so combined, the single family and the 5+ is 78% of the housing stock. So we do have a blend of missing middle, or of all types of housing, but what we're lacking is missing middle, which falls in between there, things like duplexes, 2, 3, and 4plexes, accessory dwelling units, townhomes, and courtyard apartments. And a little bit more on that same stat, when you look at the chart in a different way, you'll see that there's a mismatch between the size of the housing units and the size of the households. So housing units with 3 bedrooms, right here, you have 37% is a 3-bedroom type of unit that's available. It's oversupplied compared to 18% of the population being a 3-person household. And the same is true here. Studios and 1-bedrooms account for only a very small portion of the units available when we have 37% of the population as a 1-person household. So you just have this mismatch. And so the high quantity of 1- and 2-person households could be well served by having smaller housing types that are not currently being produced. And talking a little bit more about missing middle, some of you have probably seen this graphic in the past, but it's really a term that's used to describe providing diverse housing options, such as the duplexes, 4plexes, small multiplexes, townhomes, and cottage housing. So in this graphic, you'll see this represents single family homes on the one spectrum, end of the spectrum, multifamily over here, which is more like your apartment complexes. And so in between, you'd have duplexes, 4plexes, courtyard buildings, townhomes, medium multiplex, triple, and live work units. And a lot of times that's how zoning does work in communities, where the core of the city is often either it's non-commercial blended with some housing units, and then you kind of transition away until you get to the suburbs here. Ellensburg is a little bit unique in the fact that we do have a city center, but we're a small community and we're looking to blend housing types throughout the community where appropriate. Moving on to this slide. We looked at this at the last work session, but this is just really a representation of the increase in home values, rents, and median family income. So from 2012 to 2019, the median family income increased 15%. But over that same time period, average rent increased by 24%, and the average home value increased by 47%. So just stuff to be aware of. On this slide, let's look at the income levels. The median household income in Ellensburg is $40,126. And we do have this comparison between the county median income and Ellensburg. Household incomes in Ellensburg are lower than Kittitas County, likely influenced by the CWU student population. Students often qualify as low income or very low income in the data sets. And so just interpreting the chart, the bottom portion in this color, this 45%, is those making less than $35,000 a year. And then it goes up. You have 13% between $35,000 and about $50,000, and so on, up the range. So you can see the comparison of, we have more students in this more population in the 35,000 and less category compared to county at 33%. So to give you a little bit more about rental affordability, the average rent in 2019 was $1,442, and that is considered affordable for households earning $57,687 annually or higher, and 60% of our households in Ellensburg earn less than this amount. And in Ellensburg, 59% of the renter households are considered cost burden or severely cost burden. So just to clarify right now at this point, because there's going to be that phrase will be used again. Cost burden is when somebody spends more than 30% of their gross income on housing expenses. Severely cost burden is when you spend 50% or more of your income on household expenses. Now, to point out, so this represents 3,000 renter households struggling with household affordability. But to be blunt about this, the other category does include many of the student population. Not all, but they often fall into that category. Moving on to ownership affordability versus rent. We just talked about the home values increasing by 47%. And in 2019, the average home value in Ellensburg was $316,743. We do have to work off older data for this statistic. I think we all can agree that it's likely higher at today's rates. But this 2019 average home value is considered affordable to households that earn 115 to 120% of AMI, which is approximately $83,000 to $86,500 annually. So then we start looking at the cost burdened households by type of household. And what this shows us is almost half of older adults who live alone are cost burdened. And the way you read this is the 27% of all households in this burnt orange color, 27% are severely cost burdened. And then this lighter orange color means they're cost burdened. So the 50% of household income and 30%. Families, both large and small, are cost burdened at a rate of 27%, these combined. And the non-family households in Ellensburg are cost burdened at a rate of 60%, which likely includes many of Ellensburg's students. And then we have a few statistics about our income restricted affordable housing supply. And typically most of those are owned by agencies such as Hope Source or the Housing Authority. Ellensburg has 853 units of income restricted affordable housing units in 15 different developments. And there's a gamut. In the housing needs assessment, we have a breakdown. Some of them serve 30% of AMI and lower, and some serve all the way up to 95% of I, and some of them target older populations. It's just a variety of what we have with families, singles, senior disabled. And something to take into account and for future conversations with you is that 57% of these units will have subsidies that are expiring before 2030. And there's a few that are coming up just within the next few years. I'm not going to read these. I just gave you some definitions for you to keep in mind as you look through the slide. Okay, now talking about our population stats, the unit production. So we need to figure out how many units we need to construct moving forward. So right now we're averaging construction of 107 housing units per year. And when we say housing units, it could be single family or multifamily. It's just the unit that somebody lives in. So that's what we're averaging. And so we need to produce 4,772 total units of housing by 2037 to reach the population target that we looked at on one of the first slides. That's an average of 281 housing units per year. And when you compare that to the existing average of 107, we've got to find a way to push production. And if we were to try to catch up today, we need to build another 441 units to address the current undersupply that we have. And here's another way of looking at some of the same information. Once again, it does show the majority of housing units being constructed as single family or multifamily. When you look at this, so this is by year, 2012 to 2020, and this light gray is the single family unit. So that's depicted first on all of the years. And then the dark green is the multifamily of five or more units, or 5+ units. And then this red represents the dormitory. So this year in 2018 represents the construction of the new residence hall on campus. And then I put a note down here that Central Apartments off of Helena, the East End, accounted for the large increase in 2017 and 2018. There was 312 units that were permitted during those 2 years. And then I gave you some stats over here just to keep in mind. Single family homes have an average site density of 5.7 units per acre, what we've been constructing over the years. Duplexes and fourplexes offer double the density of single family construction, so you can fit more units in the same amount of space. And the 5+ multifamily units offer a density that is 5 times higher than the density of single family construction. So when we start having conversations about whether we should increase density, you just look at how many units you can fit on the same parcel of land.
Quick question. I was wondering, is the Sperling Court project, these are permitted, so was the Sperling Court project permitted in 2020, and is that included in that total?
Yes, that's included because this data comes straight from the building permit data that we provided to Burke. So these are current numbers.
My recollection is that project generated somewhere around, what, 50 units?
It was 49.
49, so fully half of our new units in the entire city was one project?
If you average it out,
Okay,
yeah.
that's good enough.
Yeah, I mean, we had other stuff or other
I just
units
wanted to make
constructed.
sure I had it.
Mhm.
Order
Yep,
of
that's
magnitude.
included.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. All right, then we look at the Ellensburg housing units needed by income. And so if we're just looking at the existing income levels in the community and how much housing we need, this would say that we need 1,309 units constructed that would serve those that are 30% of AMI or lower, 710 units for those that are 30 to 50% of AMI, 817 units of low income, 50 to 80%, 401 of moderate income, and then 1,536 of above median income. So you can see we need to encourage the production of a variety of types of units and affordability levels. And I'm not going to really read through all of these stats. I hope that you look through them. But one of the things I wanted to point out, I'm going to read something that came out of what we have in our housing needs assessment. It pointed out that sometimes folks down rent in a tight housing market, meaning somebody that might fall into this higher category of income might, because of lack of supply, end up renting something that would have better served a low income person. So we do need to make sure that we actually accommodate for all these different types in the market. So variety within the housing market is key to meeting the needs of different housing types. Higher density housing, such as missing middle housing, can often be offered at a lower cost due to the lower land and construction costs per unit. And then, as we just talked about, those that are at the lower income level are usually the ones most impacted by lack of units, either because they don't exist or because somebody else down rented to take them. And then just kind of moving on to the next stage in the creation of the housing action plan. We did do a review of local housing policy framework. I'm just going to touch on it today. We're not going to really go into great depth on it. There's plenty of conversation in the future. At a staff level, we did do an assessment of the housing chapter of the comprehensive plan, the goals and the policies. We assessed it for progress, how far we'd come in like implementing the goals and policies from the 2017 plan. And then we assessed for alignment with what we learned from the housing needs assessment. We found some are in alignment, but others do need to be reassessed, meaning we probably need to revisit maybe modifying or adding some additional goals to the comprehensive plan. So the housing action plan, when it's created, will inform future amendments to the comp plan. And later at the regular council meeting, amongst your huge packet about the comp plan amendments, one of the proposals included potential updates to the housing chapter, and that did include an attachment that showed our assessment of the comp plan. I just didn't think you needed it twice. So that's for future conversations. We also, with help from our consultants, Burke Consulting, did an assessment of the land development code. And just based on what staff had identified over the years, we asked them to really kind of do a high level analysis of the residential zoning code with the request that they focus on the missing middle housing types, as well as the density bonus incentive program. So we really wanted them to look at what was allowed density wise and in what zoning districts. The density bonus program is a opportunity for folks to have additional density if they do one of like 5 different categories. They have a trail system in there, they have some affordable housing units, or they have a variety of housing. But what they found is that the density bonus incentives are not great enough to warrant the developers to pursue that. And not one has actually been taken advantage of since the code was adopted in 2013. So we did ask them to look into that. And we did identify some strategies to bring the development code into alignment with the comp plan goals. And so there's a lot of work ahead of us throughout adoption of the housing action plan and after we adopt it as well. We'll have a nice work plan in place to take care of all the work. And then talking a little bit about the public engagement piece, let's go back. A little bit more about reviewing strategies in displacement. We'll point here when we're ready to do public engagement. All right, so first of all, we identified what our goals were going to be for the housing action plan. They're really basic, they're really important. I think everyone can agree on them. One is produce more housing, so we know we need that. Second is add variety to the housing stock. Just talk about why we need that. And 3, preserve and create income restricted affordable housing units, which we went through some numbers on that as well. So what we have here is I'm going to just show, we have 2 pages worth of higher level strategies. They don't get into depth or the details, but they are pitted against the 3 goals. So basically adopt means that, yeah, this potential strategy would help us meet these goals. So the strategies are encourage the construction of townhomes, encourage the construction of cottage housing, accessory dwelling units, 2, 3, 4plexes, and condominiums. And all of those meet the 2 goals of producing more housing and adding variety to the housing stock. In addition, adding or building some added flexibility into the zoning code would meet those same goals as well. On the next slide, we have strategically rezoning, which would produce more housing and add variety to the housing stock. Another strategy of preserving income restricted affordable housing developments would fall into this goal, preserve and create income restricted units. Update housing incentives to encourage missing middle housing production and income restricted affordable units would add to the variety of housing stock and preserve and create low income units. Support relocation assistance for residents of manufactured home parks when parks are sold, fall into this final category. Continue community outreach and education of housing needs. We have it falling into all of these categories. And we recognize that's something that's a very important strategy that needs to be continuous. We need to have the right messaging going out for the community members to have the context for why we need to make some changes and build support for that and have them be part of the solution with offering up their own feedback. then finally build a partnership with the Ellensburg Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Commission. So
So, hey, I think Stacy has a
I
question.
just had a question on that.
Mhm.
You used a term, I think it was down renting. So wouldn't really anything that falls into meeting the first two goals also preserve and create income restricted units? If there's more units on the market and it opened it up,
you
you
could
also
potentially,
would.
yeah, actually, that's a very good point. I will add that in there.
I had a question about the general strategies or the goals. So I get everything. I get it all as far as the desire to increase units and variety of units, fill the missing middle, all that. I get all that. Does the housing, in your estimate, do you think the housing action plan is going to address our community's capacity to build units? And by that, I mean, everything we have in the affordable category today has been basically developed through nonprofits, largely. We have very little track record of private developer investment in affordable housing and no real assurance that we're going to see a lot in the future. So it seems like when we run into issues like with our experience with Habitat and their project is one of the real constraints is their throughput. How many units per year can you build? So you've identified the need. The question I have is, do we have structurally, do we have the capacity to build that many units a year if we look at the players? And I'm guessing the answer is no. But the question is, how do we get there? So
Well,
I wondered
that's-
whether this plan is that or is that another
This is one of
conversation?
them leading toward that because this is really more of an identification.
So we
of-
don't have solutions. We just know what we need to do.
We come up with, like I said, higher level solutions, and that's what we're going to get into the weeds more. Even I'd like to get on it even before we adopt this, but continuing past that, because what we need to do is try to encourage developers to come and construct what we need, because the city of Ellensburg as an entity doesn't develop. We don't construct housing. You guys are doing what you can right now with the Affordable Housing Sales Tax Fund. You got your surplus properties. And over time, you may want to consider other strategies, but part of this will be like knowing and identifying who we need to reach out to partner with. One of the strategies that I didn't go into depth in here was like, maybe we look at a pilot program, where we solicit a developer to work with us on creating a unique kind of housing development that maybe the code doesn't call out, but then it's a demonstration project for others to say, hey, that worked in Ellensburg. And honestly, I think that we've been having mostly local developers doing the housing construction, and we are challenged with lack of trades in the community. We know this. A lot of them go to the west side where you can make more money doing the same type of work, but that's why we need to find ways to encourage what we need to take place in our own community. So David, this really is high level, but there are more details in the plan itself. I'm just not going to go into
So this doesn't get us all the way there, but it gets us in the right direction.
it's
right?
the right direction, and it's a direction that the state really wants communities to pursue because it really identifies these are things that staff knew, but we didn't have it all written down in this kind of format and something that we can start tracking. And I was talking with the consultants earlier today about working with them on some of our implementation strategies after the fact, but we're trying to plan now for what it is. But we're going to be adding to this list of strategies as we hear from council, the planning commission, the community. Even after we adopt the housing action plan, we'll still go back out to the community with more surveys to ask them how, questions to help prioritize. So this
Thank
is just a piece.
Yeah,
No, it's a great question.
I appreciate
Yes.
the response. Yeah. More partners. We need to broaden our base.
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely. Okay, now is the public engagement piece, and also going to just go into high level detail here, but we did form a stakeholder advisory group to start reviewing this and providing a little bit more detailed feedback on this. We've had 2 meetings where we first reviewed the housing needs assessment and discussed needs and priorities, and then reviewed and refined some of those strategies that were in there. And then we will have a couple more meetings to discuss progress, make more recommendations, and help with committee outreach.
Can I ask, so who, not who, but what kinds of people have you
Same
included in that?
question.
So the state had, requirements on types of representation that we wanted. And so we do have representation from the development community, real estate, all 3 nonprofits that do work in the community, the Chamber, Central, the DEI Commission, and trying to think who else.
The planning commission.
Planning Commission, the Affordable Housing Commission. And there were some other
Are there
folks-
any low income
Not
citizens that?
at present, but I figured we could
use-
still add folks because there's some folks that I haven't been able to get to participate yet that we want to reach out to, because one of the things we want them to do is actually work with their own networks, whoever's on the advisory committee, on their own networks, to share around what we're doing, share the fact that we have surveys happening, and get more feedback. So another one that I haven't had anyone participate on, the state also wanted us to make sure we were reaching out to the religious institutions, and I've got some calls out there, but that's a trusted source for a lot of people. If your local religious leader is like saying, hey, we have this survey we'd like you to take, that, you might feel more comfortable doing that and participating. So
The vast amount of rentals in town, it might also, a stakeholder could be a property manager as well.
yeah, we have somebody that is both that and a developer on there, but yes.
And you did say that Central, the housing arm of Central is represented, is that right?
There's two folks that CWU appointed, and we have been working with the housing department, if that's what you call it, over there. Yeah. They gave us a lot of their data. We actually need to refine some of that, what's in the housing needs assessment, but it was really useful data, and it's been really good to have that collaboration on this project to identify the needs. Yes. And then just a little bit about what we've done with community engagement is we do have this visual preference survey that's been initiated. It's through beheardeberg.com, and that's not solely for the housing survey. There's also questions on there right now about diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're going to be adding other projects over time. I know that we have plans to add surveys about broadband, etc. But anyway, point is, we are now working with this new online and community engagement platform. It became kind of a necessity during COVID. And I think it's something that will be really great to continue even when everybody's just meeting in person full time. I know right now things are hybrid. But we did a release in the Daily Record and on the city website. We have social media blasts going out, a banner. This is what the banner will look like. It's going to be going up over University Way in August. This month, 9,000 flyers are going out in the utility bills, and it's just a one-pager, one side English, one side Spanish. It's got survey link typed up, and then also there's a QR code on the page. So hopefully we'll get a few folks with that. And now that we have the opportunity to meet in person, we're going to explore whether or not we can fit, a meeting or two, like open house style at Hal Homes or somewhere like that. And this is just the page. This is what it looks like when you go to Be Heard eBerg. And so right now we have the Housing Action Plan and the DEI, and we're going to just start building on it. And then just a little bit more about next steps with the timeline. We did submit a draft to Commerce on June 30th. What we've put together is just really a draft. It's rudimentary. It has all the required elements. They told us it had everything it needed, but we're going to continue adding to it. In August, we'll initiate the SEPA review. In September, I have a Planning Commission public hearing, and October 4th, we'll hold a public hearing. But in the meantime, we'll come to you as needed to give you progress updates, try to keep them brief, or go into more detail if that's what you request. And then during that same time frame, the Affordable Housing Commission and Planning Commission will hold discussion at each of their meetings until October. So then after the Housing Action Plan, which is stuff we're already planning for right now, I just want to give you this quote right of, this is out of the instructions from the Department of Commerce. They state that the Housing Action Plan itself does not enact the change. The purpose is to identify the changes to be made to the comp plan and to the code. And it also can build community support and promote accountability. But we do have some detailed analysis within what we've done so far, just because we recognized up front what we needed to do. Some of the stuff. Hopefully, as more people participate, we can get ideas that staff and the consultant had not thought of. But the city does need to continue to work with organizational partners in the community members to identify priorities. City council can work with staff to enact the implementation plan. If it's going to come down to, if you're going to find a way to devote funding to some sort of purpose, you'd have to have some conversations at your level. Recommendations can always come from other folks, but ultimately you set the budget. And then even if we do adopt a housing action plan and it's stamped with a certain date, I just want to point out it's not, I like to look at it like the comp plan. It could be a living document that we could add to, we can refine, we create a work plan following it so that it's not like, oh, this is the only things we could identify as strategies. We want to continually be creative and move forward toward progress. So that's the presentation, and you've asked some good questions so far, but this is just an opportunity to reflect some more, ask questions, offer feedback.
I just had a another question on your last. You don't have to go back, but your last one talked about it. The plan can be amended as needed over time. Does Commerce have an update, a rigid update schedule? Is this like a comp plan that has to be updated?
No,
on a regular
not at
schedule?
all. We just need to turn this in, and then they're going to have other strategies and probably even grant opportunities moving forward to try to get folks to enact change. I say that on behalf of City Ellensburg staff. You know, we want to continue building on it so we know what our strategies are going to be. So it's not like an annual.
Okay. Well, it just seems like most of, I mean, for example, the 5-year, what used to be the 10-year plan for the homelessness plan for the county, Commerce changed the timeline and now it's a 5-year plan. So they always seem to have some.
And honestly, I think the state is still developing what their program is for communities, and they'll probably come out with some new ideas we haven't even heard about yet that they're discussing internally.
And then last question, is this the successful completion of this project, or this with the Commerce Department, does this enable the city of Ellensburg to qualify for specific funding that we wouldn't otherwise be eligible for?
Well, we did get funding to conduct this study of 50,000.
Post study.
And so afterwards, I would imagine it will. That's why I'm thinking like they're going to come out with some new programs and strategies.
Sure.
At the same time this came out, they were offering funding also to actually, if you'd already done this type of work, they were offering funding to make actual code changes, but then they wanted you to identify like, okay, we think if we make this code change, we're going to be able to get like this many new housing units of this type and start tracking that kind of stuff. So I think that they're just reaching out in as many directions as they can. Because as I said at the beginning, this is a statewide housing crisis, challenge, however you want to term it.
It's a Western U.S. crisis.
Yes.
Maybe.
Is this offered to all municipalities in the state? And do you know how many are actually doing it?
It was, and I don't know. It was just on it's not a requirement, it's something you can choose to do. And many took them up on it. The interesting thing is that if you're a population of 20,000 or more, you got twice the money. So we almost.
So our 19,000 didn't cost us. We're okay.
Yeah.
Did we get in under the wire?
Yeah, it's an interesting. Yeah, when we applied for it, we were.
Or we were under, so we didn't get twice.
No, we did get it.
No, we got 50,000.
But which is the higher number?
No, they offered 100,000.
Oh, because we dropped below 20.
It was. We
Another
applied.
quote.
Yeah, it was. We applied in 2020, and they were using the previous year's figures. Yeah.
I have a few questions. On slide 11, I wrote it down.
Okay, let's see. Find it and then I'll go
Was
back.
Housing stock, like bedrooms.
Goodness.
Right there. Okay, so we've talked about this mismatch before, and I'm curious, because like you talked about cost burden households, is that really what the cost burden households is? Because sometimes the data gets skewed just because we have an interesting mix of community with the university being here. If the students qualify mostly as single adults, we don't really think that they all want to live in one-person households, though, right?
Not all, but one of the challenges is also just single working professionals. And it's just really hard to parse out students versus this, because not all students are single either. There's students have families.
But the disparity between the bottom graph and the top graph might not be as great as
No,
it
it's
appears,
just
right?
it's just an interesting exercise in analyzing what we have versus what the need is.
And
Yeah,
I
it's
would
not
agree.
exact.
My experience finding a one-bedroom is ridiculously difficult.
Yeah.
So just to follow up on that, our goal is not to reach 37%
No, this is not the goal.
Studio.
Let's
It's
see what page.
to serve the one-person household.
So if we wanted to go back to the slide where we talked about needed by Nope, that's not it. How many units we need by income? That's one way to look at it. And this is just saying by income. So, you need 1,300 units to serve those, making 30% of AMI. We don't know what their household type is. We don't know if they need a 3-bedroom house or a 1-bedroom house, but just keeping in mind, we need a lot of low-income housing available. So there's a few different ways to parse out the data and look at it.
Sorry for interrupting, Stacy.
No,
You-
I
you have the
think
floor.
it's great when they're you talked about the cost of housing jumped dramatically, and there was a line graph. Can you go to that?
Oh, it's really out of date, though, I'm gonna tell you.
This one?
Yes. Yes. Do we have any baseline for what the cost of living of anything else, like what the increase was? Because I imagine there is a cost of living increase over time. I mean, property tax goes up, milk goes up, gas goes up. So I'm guessing that 47 for housing isn't, is it really 25 or is it 45 or what is it above and beyond what everything else goes up? Do you have any indicator?
We didn't go into that kind of detail. No, that's a good thing to keep in mind. And I heard Mary say that this is out of date. It is. We're working with 2019 numbers here, and we know that things are much more dire than
So
this
these
shows.
net increases over about 7 years.
Yeah, over a 7-year time period. So that's just to take in, it's a fact to consider. Prices are continually going up, and income does not match.
Okay. And then you talked about strategies and you had the table with the dots based on your goals. Kind of related to a previous question, I'm guessing that you're coming in front of council again with, right now it's very high level. But if we acknowledge these are the strategies, the staff recommends we take these actions to achieve the encouraging the construction of townhomes. Is that coming? Are you guys gonna move towards what specific strategies we're going after and what staff recommends to get there?
Yeah, so the draft that we have so far actually goes into more detail on each of these. Some of them have like a page or two on some of the findings of what we could do to achieve these.
Okay.
Some go into more detail than others. And then there's things we can add to it. And at the next meeting, we are going to go into a little more detail on anti-displacement strategies.
Okay. And then related to that, I guess I haven't seen the detailed version of this. Has one of the strategies been addressed so far as inclusionary housing? Is that been put on the table?
That wasn't included, but the state we come up with this huge toolbox of ideas to consider, and that's always in there.
Okay.
And it's always one that a community needs to decide if it works in their community.
So you're talking about inclusionary zoning.
Yeah, like, because we have an affordability problem in addition to a housing stock problem. And the funds that we've created, I've always tried to, how can we be more creative with this fund to get more affordable units available? And I'm curious if we did something like inclusionary where every developer had to have one, if you develop more than 5 units, one of them needs to be at a certain AMI. Can we use that fund to either, as I just think of as a landlord, I've never gone after that because it's really the path of least resistance, and I know nothing about that. So for me to screen tenants and to verify income, and it's just outside of my wheelhouse. And I think that there's probably other people that feel that way. I tend to think I'm not that unique. But if we could use that fund to contract Hope Source for developers, like, hey, you build your 5 units and we'll pay for Hope Source to manage that 1 unit for you. Like, how creative can we get with that fund? Typically inclusionary zoning gives you an opt-out where you can donate land or you can pay a fee to get out of your units or.
Yeah, some of the ones that I've studied, and they're in larger metro areas primarily, one of the trades is that in addition to what you described, which is right, is more density. It's like a departure.
Right.
And I think, it's just something that we haven't studied. I know other communities in the state are looking at, including small communities. It's not just large metro areas.
But there are bonuses right now for density and for height, I believe, as well, that haven't been taken advantage
But they're
of.
ineffective is what we found.
So I'm interested in what staff, I mean, you and your team are the ones that are dealing with this day in and day out. I'm interested in what you think would make a difference. And, you know, like you've looked at the data, you see the permits come in, you talk to the developers. What's your take on, you know, I think if we did this, this might move the needle.
So we definitely want to make sure we go to the community about this, and some strategies will work in certain neighborhoods and not others. But what I've seen is we need to be more flexible, increase what we allow in the different zoning districts, consider increasing the density allowances. And if we're gonna have density bonus incentives, they have to be meaningful ones that actually make a difference to cost. You know, I've talked to a lot of the developers over the last few years whenever they come with a new proposal, and they're like, it doesn't make a difference to me. I'll get like 2 extra units out of this. And so what you'll see in the housing action plan is they did a little bit analysis of that and told us, like, if you want to make this work, this is what your density bonus should be. So we need to look at that. And honestly, other communities are doing some really interesting things. I think it was Walla Walla who, they just have one residential zoning district,
Yeah.
period. And then the densities are different, and then what types of units you can have are up there. And sometimes there's conversation about, instead of saying you can have 6 dwelling units per acre, in trying to, you know, determine how many acres or units per acre, you kind of let people propose a housing type or a unit on this piece of land, and all they have to do is demonstrate they can meet the setbacks that you choose, open space and parking. And maybe they can make it fit, maybe they can't. I think it's just an uncomfortable conversation. It's outside the box and what was normally done. As you look around in Ellensburg, everything is, all the new stuff is your basic traditional, mostly 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-car garage, single family units. And we have several subdivisions in the queue right now for that very type. And I would love to see some creativity and something different. And if you look around downtown, it's very unique and eclectic. And I think most people appreciate it for its uniqueness. You have a variety of types next to one another. But then we have to have the right kind of conversation with the community, because a lot of people are uncomfortable with change. They don't want things in their backyard. They want to maybe see visuals of what something would look like before they'd be okay with saying, yes, this works. And then there's people that just want Ellensburg to remain a nice rural, small town feel community, which we all love that about it. So what can we do growing and moving forward to maintain that sense of a small town community, but have this variety of housing options? I think you could have really cool things with cottage housing. I think we need to promote townhouse development more, because we have townhouse style rentals. They're not townhouse units where you sell them off as simple feedlots where somebody owns it. Like, that's a nice entry level homeownership opportunity, and nobody's offering that. But we don't have very good density to make them even want to do that. We need to increase it for townhomes to be built.
So it's 10 minutes to 7.
Yeah.
If you guys want at least a 5-minute break, we need
Yes.
to wrap up. I just wanted to comment that there's an assumption that the median household income is the 40,000, which I thought that there was a way to break out the students versus the community members, and if there is, I would encourage trying to do that, because that skews everything else. And I just don't, I know that students have income that is not like reported as income because it's like from parents or something. And so it makes a difference how much they can spend.
Mm-hmm.
And since it's half the population, it's just skewed. So,
And we do have a little bit more of that type of data in the housing needs assessment that tries to break it out by category. So yeah, I just gave you the higher level numbers today, but yes.
yeah, so it's just, I don't want everything to be based on 40,000 as their median income, and
Yeah, absolutely.
I had a quick question. I know we're short on time, but just on the ADU, that one of the strategies here in the ADU, do we have enough of a track record with the last couple of years since we modified our land development code to encourage or incentivize ADU development? We've had a few pop up. I'm just wondering if there's enough of a data set there.
We have the data. I'm not recalling the exact numbers off the top of my head, but I think there was an increase, but not an exponential increase in the number of ADUs that were built.
Correlate the increase with the easing of restrictions somehow, or is it just your?
I think just the general knowledge that we had, the ability to build ADUs kind of helped increase it, but I want to say there was, I don't know, maybe 11 in the
Yeah,
last
okay.
year or two.
Okay.
Not a ton, but I think that you did slightly increase the maximum you could do on small lots to like 500 square feet. That helped a little bit, and there's things we could look at to try to promote that.
Yeah,
I think part of the other issue is that for many people, they already have a mortgage on their home. And to build the ADU, they're going to spend a fair chunk of change these days. If you can even get a contractor, you're probably looking at a year before you could even start. So it's just time.
So what you need to do,
and it's not cheap.
we need a trade school here, right? Building some demo projects.
I would agree with Mary, and that's why I said I'm really interested in your strategies, because I know other communities like pre-permit plans for ADUs. I'd just like to see us remove as many barriers as possible to get.
Yeah, and
Yes,
any
right.
ideas that you throw out, we will want to include for sure. So I appreciate
So
all the feedback so far.
Let's adjourn this and take a break before we start our regular session.
At 7 o'clock.
Thank you, guys.
7 o'clock.
Interested.